to you from where I sit. But sir, I want first as well to thank the Honourable Attorney General for leading this debate for me. This morning, regrettably, or I shouldn't say regrettably, this morning I was obviously taken up in the affairs of the country with the President of Argentina here, President Fernandez, and therefore could not be here for the beginning of Parliament. But this debate is so important that I've taken my leave from His Excellency the President of Argentina to come to this Parliament to participate in this debate before I go back to him in meetings with him and lunch with him and other members of the heads of government from the OECS. And I've done so, sir, because there are 2 points of principle at stake here this morning. The first one relates to transparency and even-handedness and fairness. In 1950, this Parliament passed the Adult Suffrage Act, Universal Adult Suffrage Act, led ably so by the father of our democracy, the Right Excellent Sir Grantley Herbert Adams. And that removed from us the awful spectacle of a person only being able to vote if they had property. I want to repeat myself, that in this country, there was a time when you could only vote if you had property. And given that the majority of our citizens had no property, it meant that in every election prior to 1951, the majority of Barbadians did not vote in this country. Mr. Speaker, this is not even 71 years ago. This is 70 years ago. 70. Think of how many people in our own families we know that are 70 or over. I still like to feel that I'm young, although every time I look at the gray hair in my head, I'm beginning to understand that that is a figment of my imagination. But I want it always to be a reality of my body, to continue to be young, and my spirit. But the reality is that for a small country such as ours that is recently independent, the ability to have every Barbadian have the right to vote is something that us young ones take for granted. But Mr. Speaker, 70 years ago, 70, it was not our reality. In those days, when they passed the legislation, they settled on the age of 21 as the age of majority and the age from which people could vote. And that remained the case for many years until, like with other things internationally, the age was dropped and reduced to 18 years old. The anomaly, however, existed that even though you could vote for someone at 18, you cannot serve in either House of Parliament unless you're 21 and over. And typically speaking, sir, a continuous approach of reform of our laws and constitution would have led to this being one of the main areas that was changed. Indeed, sir, I believe the work that was done when I was Attorney General, ably led by the then Chief Parliamentary Counsel, Madam Shirley Bell. I didn't give notice to call her name, but I apologize, sir. And I will call the other names because I'm not using them in a manner that brings any disrepute to their honor. In fact, it is the opposite. Sir Roy Marshall, who was my then advisor as Attorney General, who was a Vice-Chancellor of the University of the West Indies and of the University of Hull, and the first, I think, colored chairman of the Commission of Racial Equality in England, in the United Kingdom. Professor Keith Patchett, who was then the advisor as well to the chambers that I led, the Attorney General's chambers. But so Professor Patchett was the first dean of the law faculty at Cave Hill. Professor Simeon McIntosh, who regrettably has also passed on, who was a constitutional law expert and who wrote the book Caribbean Constitutions. That was his specialty, day in, day out. Mr. Hal Gollop and Mr. Teddy Griffith, who was the Law Reform Commissioner at the time. Not Teddy Griffith. Mr. Griffith is Teddy Griffith's brother. I forget his name now. That is the sign of the body not being as young as I would like, and matching the gray hair in the head. But they were the ones who sat for months, and we went through systematically the preparation of a draft constitution bill that excluded 2 or 3 parts that required the then Prime Minister to give policy directions on for us to go any further. I go into this point, sir, because the Barbados Constitution has not had that kind of serious review and amendment since the passage of independence. And even though we have taken it as our own and passed it as our own in the last Parliament, as one of the last acts of the last Parliament, we knew then that it was riddled with things that would not perhaps suit us in this 3rd decade of the 21st century, some 55 years after the passage of the initial Constitution. Unlike others who believe, like the Republican Party in the United States of America, that a constitution is a statue to be looked at and never touched, a constitution simply, as you know, Mr. Speaker, must relate to the reality of the society within which people are functioning. And it is that supreme law that should tell us how we should govern ourselves, and more importantly, not just about the role of government or the structure of government, but the role and structure of our governance as well. It is against that backdrop, Mr. Speaker, that we believe that to allow the Constitution to remain irrelevant to the conditions of our people would be to reduce the value of the Constitution in ordering our societies and ordering our nation states to being able to do the best that we can by our citizens, for our citizens. And Mr. Speaker, I'm ever conscious these days, and I say it all the time, that this Parliament has been used as an instrument of oppression for too long in its past, and must equally now be a tool of empowerment for our people. To have a young man or a young girl be able to vote in an election, but to deny them the right to vote for themselves by being a candidate in the very same election is wrong. And where we see wrong things, we have a duty to correct them wherever possible. In this particular instance, it has been triggered by the desire of my government, yes, to appoint a young man who we believe has tremendous skill and ability to share a perspective for that category of person in our society who, though Barbadian and young, do not necessarily feel as though they are engaged in the major discussions of our nation. And I say so, Mr. Speaker, because I came to this office at a very young age too. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, I first became a candidate at the age of 23. I ran in my first election at the age of 25, and that was old. I lost it. I was appointed to the Senate at that age, and people felt that I was one of the youngest senators to have served then. And what I learned by participating in the Senate, I maintain, is largely responsible for my own career in public life, because in the Senate, as one of two opposition senators, I had to be prepared to speak on any and all matters that came before the Honourable Senate. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that our young people, and I go further, I would have served as a young minister as well. And when I became Minister of Education at 28, and Liz Thompson, the Deputy President of the Senate, I should perhaps say no, sir, was 30, and the President of the Senate, I think, was 31 or 32 when he came into cabinet. We had a cabinet that was full of young people. And there were those at the time who wondered how such young people could handle the ministries of education and health, and that we might even have been too green for such heavy portfolios. I would like to think, Mr. Speaker, that in both instances, or in all three instances, we proved them wrong. Indeed, the former member for St. Michael North, who has now left us after decades of distinguished service, I refer to the Honourable Ronald Toppin, would have been a year or two older than I think Reggie, so that all of us basically were under the age of 35. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure today to correct a wrong that really ought to be corrected. And this Honourable Chamber is using the opportunity to correct it not only for the Senate, but for the House of Assembly. This is without prejudice to all that must be done going forward. The second major amendment in this bill, as we learned earlier from the Honourable Attorney General, relates to the reality of who should occupy the role and function of opposition in the absence of a clear determination by the electorate that there will be one other body sharing in the elected seats of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, I have spoken to this and have thanked the people of Barbados for this comprehensive and complete mandate that it has given us in terms of the governance of this nation. I've reminded us that Barbados remains a multi-party democracy in every sense, but that the people have chosen through the electorate to give us all of the seats in the last two elections was probably something that was not anticipated by the drafters of our original Constitution. But these things happen, just as we learned in other Commonwealth countries of a tie. These things happen. And on the last occasion, as I indicated publicly, but not in this Honourable Chamber, we indicated at the time that as a government we were prepared to do the right thing in our view and to facilitate the appointment of senators by the opposition in the other place, but also to recognize that that in and of itself would not be sufficient, because there are a number of appointments in the Constitution that rely on either a recommendation by or consultation with the leader of the opposition. And Mr. Speaker, therefore, my government took the decision that it is only but fair that we, on this occasion, having in the end not had to do it on the last occasion because of the decision by the then member for St. Michael West to cross the floor and to take up the office of Leader of the Opposition, that it was not relevant then. But now that it has happened a second time, we believe that it is our duty to be able to resolve these issues in a manner that makes sense and that is consistent with our values as a nation. And what are those values, sir? That we do not believe that having won all the seats in this country, in this parliament, that we are omnipotent or omniscient, that we are all powerful or that we know everything. Never have and never will. And we recognize that there are valid perspectives that have to be shared. And that is why we are taking a position, even in the structure of this parliament, and I trust that the Standing Orders Committee will get to its business as a matter of urgency, that there ought to be standing committees that will lead the engagement of this parliament with the people of this nation, in spite of the fact that they have elected representatives in here. Because we know that while there are some bills that clearly we will act as the elected representatives of the people and do what we have to do, there are also other bills or other policies that may require deeper engagement with the people of this nation, and hence we hope to be able to strengthen and deepen the effectiveness of this parliament as an instrument, as a tool of empowerment, and not just simply to have been that instrument of oppression as it was when it passed the 1661 slave code that regrettably spawned all of those slave codes in North America and the Americas that spoke to black people being 3/5 of a human being, etc. That is the legacy of this parliament. But we have chosen as current members to change that legacy. And the legacy we want to leave is one that empowers our people and that gives them opportunities that are fair, and that even when, as we have in this particular instance, a situation where no elected member has come to be voted from any other party, that this particular amendment says, go to the political party that has the second highest votes or the highest votes that was not elected as the government, for want of a better reference. And if they say no, then you go to the next. And if they say no, you go to the next. And if they say no, then you go back to the exercise of discretion by the president, or in that particular case where it is to be exercised by the prime minister. Now, why is this important, sir? The Democratic Labour Party is over 65 years old and has done well by this country during its life. I trust and pray that it will do well by this country in its future again. But what cannot happen is for us to ignore the reality that they have a role to play. If they choose not to play it, that is a matter for them. But I trust and pray that they will understand that this goes beyond the politics of the day, and that this goes fundamentally to the strengthening of our democracy. I do not believe that any prime minister should have the right to choose all 5 members of the Electoral and Boundaries Commission, however so constructed. I do not believe that we should ignore the requirements for the level of consultation across divides that would want us to have services commissions and other elected persons in our Constitution to reflect that unity of purpose that we would want to see on affairs of a national state. And it is against that backdrop, therefore, that even though the president has the right in her own absolute discretion to appoint 2 senators in the absence of an opposition, that does not solve the second part of the equation, which is how do we facilitate greater consultation, particularly in the appointments to posts or commissions that exercise great power in this country. I have said it over and over, and I will continue to repeat it, because it is something that I believe fundamentally in, and that is why, since assuming office in May of 2018, I have ensured that our government follows in this vein. And what is that? A prime minister has very, very few powers, but some of them are so absolute that I believe that they require and required checks and balances or reviews. The power to appoint a Chief Justice, only consulting with the leader of the opposition. And in those instances, consulting seems more to be notification than consult and agree. Or to appoint judges, sir. For that third arm of government, the judiciary, has been an extraordinary power that has been vested in many prime ministers in Westminster system. And one of the first things that we did as a government is to say no. Even though the right ultimately vests in the Prime Minister consulting with the leader of the opposition, impose a mechanism in there that allows for greater transparency and participation by passing legislation to guide judicial appointments and having a Judicial Advisory Appointments Committee established that is comprised of a former Chief Justice, a former President of the Caribbean Court of Justice in this particular instance, a former judge, a representative of the Bar Association, and a lay person. So that all of the judges appointed as well as the Chief Justice, since coming to office, have been done not because of any arbitrary position or exclusive position taken by me as Prime Minister, but have been done as a result of the advice of that Judicial Advisory Appointments Committee. Mr. Speaker, no Prime Minister before me has diluted their power of appointment of members of the judiciary or of a Chief Justice before the deliberate passage of that legislation by this government. And I say so because when we met in Bay Street on the 27th of May, and when I spoke recently at State House for the reappointment of members to this government, I made the point then that we will treat sensitively and carefully the mandate given to us. And that while we understand that Barbadians recognize that the times in which we live require strong mandates, they also know whom they can trust. There's a young man who wrote in today's paper with whom I was truly, truly impressed. 19 years old, a second-year law student, I believe. And he made the point that the numbers in opposition clearly do not determine or are not sufficient to stop a government from doing nonsense. And that if you look at the 2013 Parliament, Mr. Speaker, it was the strongest ever opposition in the history of this country. But it did not stop the last government from signing Cahill documents. And it did not stop the last government from presiding over sewage in the street. And it did not stop the last government from doing a whole host of things, from the deprivation of free education to the pausing and stopping of flexi time for police and nurses and everybody. Didn't stop the last government from running all of our infrastructure down to the ground, all of our equipment and buses down to the ground and leaving people in the country exposed to the elements and not being able to get home. It didn't stop any of that in spite of the fact that they were in breach, in my view, of the Central Bank Act. It didn't. So that the mere presence of an opposition party in Parliament does not guarantee that a government will not do foolishness. And the corollary of that is that the absence of an opposition does not mean that a government will do foolishness either. And in fact, I stand here proud of the record of this government over the course of the last almost 4 years, whether in the first term or in this new term. But I stand here prouder because we have come to do the right thing. And there are many who have called me and continue to call me by the day and said, "Are you an idiot? Are you a fool? Why are you giving people a whip to beat you?" Principles only mean something when it is inconvenient to stand by them. And Mr. Speaker, it is to my certain knowledge that during the course of this term, there are a number of appointments and a number of commissions that will come up for reappointment. And I believe that if we want our young people to be agents of fairness, if we want our people in a society not to discriminate against each other, then the two principles that these constitutional amendments speak to are vital. Non-discrimination on the basis of age and inclusion on the basis of relevance and participation, because the Democratic Labour Party and other political parties, even though they did not win the election, received support from citizens of our nation and residents of our nation. And those citizens and residents have a right, in my view, in a restructured parliament and in a restructured Barbados, to have their voices heard. Now, can we do the restructuring of the Constitution and the Constitutional Reform Commission overnight? No, we can't. And so much so, Mr. Speaker, we've said to people that we want to do it in a measured and transparent way, and that rather than just simply bring the new bill and give it to everybody and say, read it in the next 2 months, and you've got 2 months to talk about it. Listen, no. Break it down, Mr. Speaker, as it is now in chapters. The first set of chapters, the declaratory provisions and the fundamental rights and responsibilities. Spend 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks talking to the country about it. Have an aid memoir prepared on it. I hear others complaining that there's no explanatory memorandum to this bill, but let us start. You don't get explanatory memoranda to every bill. And this is really a 2-clause bill. This is a 2-clause bill. Doesn't need it because it is self-explanatory. But when we start dealing with the full Constitution, section by section by section, role of governance, role of government, the role of the public service, the role of the Electoral and Boundaries Commission, the role, I hope, then of an Integrity Commission. All of these things ought to be captured in there. And we're going to take the country through it. And if it takes us 12 months, 15 months, 18 months, it matters not. Because that is where the real consultation comes. Not in determining whether a Bajan should be a Bajan head of state. And all we're doing is to try to do these things in an orderly manner, but recognize that some things can be taken out and dealt with as a matter of urgency and form. And we've done that. Others don't necessarily agree, but we have made the determination that this is the way in which we feel we should govern appropriately. And in particular on this issue as to whether opposition interests ought to be reflected in the Parliament and by extension in the decision-making of appointments to constitutional positions. I hope, Mr. Speaker, that this makes it abundantly clear that this government is doing this because it is the right thing to do, both for purposes of non-discrimination on the basis of age and for inclusion in terms of voices who have a legitimate right to be heard and to be represented in our nation, even if not in the lower house. And there are reasons for it. In the upper house, they can't vote on money bills. So the public has already determined that they don't want them to vote on money bills because, money resolutions, sorry. They can only vote on bills that speak to the broader thing, but they have no role in terms of taxation and the Committee of Supply, as we would previously have called it in this honourable chamber. And that's the right of the public to determine those things. But as to the broader construction of Parliament, we also can create a place for them because we feel that it is the right thing to do. And let me end on this one point, because the second, I talked about one instance in where I reduced the powers of the Prime Minister with the Judicial Advisory Appointments Committee. The second instance was in the appointment of the head of state. Because hitherto, a Prime Minister would appoint a Governor General. You consult and tell the leader of the opposition, this is who you plan to appoint, and that's the end of the matter. That's how every previous Governor General in Barbados has been appointed since 1966. Every last one, by every previous Prime Minister. And I said, no. As a child of independence, it does not sit well with my soul to have one person elect a head of state, just as it does not sit well in our soul to have a hierarchical head of state, a hereditary head of state, in our midst. Because that's not who we are. And we believe that people are recognized and each have the dignity of agency, and each of us are born equal to each other. So we reduce that power of the Prime Minister with that respect. It is in this instance too I say no. Section 75, as currently drafted, still vests too much power in my office. And we are prepared to make these changes because we feel it is the right thing to do 55 years after the passage of that foundational document that is there now as the Constitution. So, Mr. Speaker, it is against that backdrop, therefore, that I have the greatest pleasure in seconding and supporting the amendments that have been brought to this Honourable Chamber. I have a number of engagements still with His Excellency, the President of Argentina, but I believe that my participation in this debate to set context such that the people of Barbados understand why we are here and what we are doing, especially since the language from the President, the acting President of the Democratic Labour Party, was basically to tell me to go and fly a kite. And if I was a weak person, I might listen to that. And if I was a person that did not believe in principle, I might even listen to him. But this goes beyond him. It goes beyond me. It goes beyond the party as it is today. It goes beyond this Barbados Labour Party. It goes to the character of our democracy. And we have a responsibility to do the right thing when it presents itself. And I hope that this will, in and of itself, also be a learning moment for those of us who have been given much and for whom there's a wide space in terms of what you can do and not do. But we know from the biblical injunction that to whom much is given, much is expected. And we teach our children that in Sunday school every week. And for us, therefore, to come into this honourable chamber, to know that, to teach it, and to reject it would be the wrong thing. And I therefore ask the honourable members, and I'm conscious that there are some new members to this honourable chamber. And Mr. Speaker, I hope that I will be here to catch all of the maiden speeches, but if I'm not, I intend to listen to them through the technology that is now afforded to us. But suffice it to say that I hope that the manner in which this Parliament of 2022 starts will forever stand in the mind of the young members of Parliament who are here. The member for St. Michael North, the member for the City of Bridgetown, the member for St. Philip West, the member for St. Andrew, and the gentleman behind me holding my back, the member for St. Michael West. I hope that as young members of Parliament, you understand a lesson which Nelson Mandela also taught in his autobiography. That very often, even if you are in a battle with somebody and you can beat them, you must never seek to obliterate them, to embarrass them, or to reduce them to the point where they are incapable of having a sensible and humane relationship because they feel that they have been so ostracized and excluded from participation. And in this instance, I understand it, because this Labour Party knew what it was in 1986 to be reduced to 3 seats. And the irony was, that is when I joined this party, you know. When it was being accused of having only 3 blind mice. And I learned lessons then, just as I hope that you will learn lessons now. And that we recognize that there are obligations on us that go immediately beyond what is apparent in most instances. In this instance, it is to stabilize the decision-making process in this country. Not to reject the mandate of the people, but to level out what can be done in the other place and with the other appointments referred to in the Constitution. And finally, as I said, to make sure that the simple principle that if you are old enough to vote, then you must be old enough to vote for yourself too, and hence participate in the parliament of this nation. So, Mr. Speaker, it gives me great honor to second these amendments, this constitutional amendment bill of 2022, and to encourage all other honorable members to support it, but particularly for the young members to be guided by the fact that sometimes you have to go high and to take the higher ground, even when people goad you to stay in the gutter with them. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Honourable for the City of Bridgetown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am aware that I am making this speech just before lunch, always a dangerous place to start. But with that in mind, I shall continue and try to keep it as brief as possible. Prime Minister, fellow members, good morning. Those in my hearing, good afternoon. Sorry. I want to begin by thanking Almighty God for the opportunity to stand here this morning and this afternoon in what is a surreal moment for me at this point in time. But I stand here humbly so, nonetheless. I want to start by thanking also the good people of the city of Bridgetown, who it is through their faith, their support, their vote, and their confidence in me that gives me the opportunity to stand here to represent their interests. I shall do so to the best of my ability. Through you, Mr. Speaker, I want to speak to the constituents directly. With your permission, it is really to tell them that the road here has not been an easy one, and we understand the difficulties facing them, their communities, and this nation, and that I have the full confidence in this government that we shall continue to do the best in our ability to improve the lives of all. It is with pride and humility that I accept their mandate to work with this government and to ensure that this government has my full support in order to do so. As I said before, I shall serve in their interests. Now, with the resolution at hand, Mr. Speaker, I could not come to this chamber and not contribute on a resolution such as this that speaks particularly to 3 things, but one in particular that touches me in a particular and a very special and deep way. And that is the amendment that speaks to reducing the age at which one can represent their country at the highest level, both in this honorable chamber and in another place. Mr. Speaker, the year was 1999. The school was lodged. The farm was 5th. The place was Solidarity House, as the Honourable Member for St. George North will be very familiar. And the place was really, on the occasion, Youth Parliament. And I represented young people at that time and in that place when we were unable even to have a session in the Honourable Chamber. And with your permission again, Mr. Speaker, to call some names in glowing fashion. I cannot go as far back as some honourable members, as I thank the Honourable Member for St. Joseph and the Honourable Member for St. Michael North East for their contribution. Mine has a little more recent vintage. And I will go to the 1970s, with people like Dr. Bradley Niles, who would have blazed the trail for the youth movement behind Barbados Youth Council, where they would have crawled basically to get to where the people of, again, more vintage, the Honourable Chantal Monroe Knight from another place, the Jason Carmichaels, the Ronnie Ewells, and so on. Because at that time, we felt that young people were totally ignored, totally not engaged. And we moved to a position where they were then used as tokenism and window dressing, being allowed to have a say here and a representation there, where they were moved to be allowed to be on boards and vote and make a difference in this country. Now this government in this setting has found it fit that to allow them to sit in the highest chamber in the land and represent their own and their people. And that is something that the government of Barbados must be commended on. Don't be frightened to pound for that. It is fundamental. Because we have crawled and we've walked, and it allowed me then, in the early 2000s, as the Prime Minister of the Youth Parliament, to run, to be able to take policy to the then administration, the then Barbados Labour Party administration, on things that as a Youth Parliament we debated. And we were heard, and we were allowed to make a contribution. And we've allowed them, the trims and those that have come after, to bowl, to fly. And now we have the young people being given the opportunity, the Shades and the Tyres and the Kyles, now they can come and they can enter now into a Barbados in warp speed and be able to bring the policies, the programs, and the progress that this country would want to see. There was a time as a young man in this country, I felt that the one qualification that you required was a full head of gray hair in order to make a contribution in this nation. Now we have put that to rest, and we have put that behind us in a way that young people in this country can be inspired and know that Barbados is theirs. They belong to Barbados, and Barbados belongs to them. That they can make a meaningful contribution in this Republic of Barbados. And that is something that I am so proud of today. But to the young people, I ask you now, you've been given your respect. You've been given your right. You must know that it now comes with a responsibility. A responsibility to bring value and impact, and not just fluff and buzzwords and big words. It is now your responsibility to show up and to show up. To arrive and to do. Not arrive and slouch and say, I have arrived. But to ensure that everything that you do is to the interests and the best interests of this country, Barbados. To grab this opportunity with both hands and to go forth and be substance over form. The record must state, though, however, the first time that this was mentioned to me, I had my own reservations. When we look at the other place, we know that you have the opportunity to represent interest groups. And I do believe at 18, someone can represent an interest group called youth. When I think about the House of Assembly, though, and carrying the weight of a constituency, I had my own reservations. But I do believe in the strength of a democracy that says if the majority of persons within a constituency have assessed you, have heard you, have walked with you, and they believe that you are fit, like the Honourable Member for St. Joseph mentioned, that there are some young people way beyond their age in maturity and responsibility that our democratic levers allow for us to assess and decide, then I am fine with that. Who am I to stand in the way of that? And therefore, I can now give this amendment my full support. For me, it is the pride of my life to stand here not only to witness, but to participate and be part of history. Because it is not always that you will reach the mountaintop, that you will get to the promised place. But every member in here has to understand that you must take pride and joy in the fact that you become part of the journey. On the part of the amendment that speaks to the opposition, for me it is a no-brainer, and it doesn't really require that much of a debate and a lot of long talk. Because the only other thing we could do is to have a separate, expensive distraction of having an election of opposition leader. So the next best thing, Mr. Speaker, is really to go ahead, like the members stated early and the members stated earlier, to go ahead and make sure that the party, the collective, receiving the next number or level of votes from the people of Barbados can go ahead then and make the recommendation. And as the Honourable Prime Minister, the member for St. Michael North East said, if they don't want it, out of whatever, I will keep it PG-13 today, Mr. Speaker, sir, out of whatever notion, that we then will move on to the next, because the business, the people's business must continue. So for me, it is important that we put these amendments in place to ensure that the people's business will not be held up by whatever notion that prevents persons from stepping forward and seeking to represent, even if the minority in this country. Mr. Speaker, there's a task at hand, and I am mindful of the task at hand before this government. But I am by no way daunted by the many challenges that will confront us and that are confronting us at this point in time. Because I am confident that we have the team for the times, that we are positioned to meet the challenges of this nation, of this Caribbean, and of this world of which we operate in today. Whether it be the rising sea levels, the climate change, the cost of living, and the myriad of other things that confront us as a government and confront us as a people. Mr. Speaker, I am so confident that the team that I sit with, the team that I run with, the team that will take Barbados and continue to take Barbados first into the 21st century. Many have said that our agenda is too ambitious as they look at our manifesto. Mr. Speaker, I am confident that it is realistic. I, for one, am part of this team that understands that a new dawn and a new Barbados is in sight, ably led by the Most Honourable Mia Amor Motley, our leader and Prime Minister. I hope that none of my colleagues are daunted by the things that are coming at us and that will come at us, because I, for one, Mr. Speaker, am not. From where I stand, Mr. Speaker, I want to go back to the place that placed me here, and I want to place on the record that I want to thank the Most Honourable, the former Member of Parliament for the city, Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Bostick, for his stewardship, for his mentorship, for his guidance, for his abiding faith, but more so and more so for his service to the city of Bridgetown, to the Barbados Labour Party, and to the country Barbados. Mr. Speaker, when the history books are written, you will agree that my predecessor will go down in the record of one of the finest ministers of health that this country has ever seen. Wherever you are, Mr. Bostick, I salute you again. I salute you. Mr. Speaker, I also want to take this opportunity as I close to thank my wife, my campaign team, my constituency office, my supporters, those who held me up in prayer, all of you. I thank you. I sincerely thank you. To the people of Barbados, I urge you to steer the course, to hold on to the values and ideals that have made us Barbadian. Mr. Speaker, patriotism, faith, resilience, diversity, it must be at the forefront of every Barbadian at this time to truly transform the society and this nation in the way that we need it to be. Cooperation is key, and it is needed in every sphere of this country. Fellow Barbadians, whether you supported this great party or not in the recent elections, I urge every Barbadian to come on board Envy Barbados. Come on board. Barbados that can be the envy of the world. I urge each and every one of you, after we've been through the last elections, to come together and settle down and to repeat the Prime Minister's call to let us line up behind one leader, one government, one cause as we move forward in this term and this session of Parliament. Fellow parliamentarians, we are here today because we have the support of the majority of Barbados, and I want us to not take that for granted. I want us to take it serious that the electorate has put us here in order to take Barbados forward. For me, as the Parliamentary Secretary for the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, I want to assure this government and the people of Barbados that too I shall give my 100%, that too I shall give my utmost, that too I shall give all the energy vested in me to ensure that the people of this country and the elderly of this country is not just go through just aging, but moving and staging where they can have a quality life as they so deserve, because a lot of the things that we enjoy in this country is due to their hard work and their sacrifice, that we are able to live a standard of life in Barbados beyond many countries in this world. And to them, I salute the elderly in this country. In my own constituents and all Barbadians, to the Muslim community, to the Indian community, the black community, the white community, the Rastafarian community, to the rich, the poor, every boy, every girl, every man, every woman, Mr. Speaker, I say to them, let us work together. For me, I want no Barbadian to be left behind, as we understand that we loyal sons and daughters all do hereby make it known. These fields and hills beyond recall are now our very own. And as we stand in the Republic of Barbados, we can recite our national anthem with a degree of extra pride, as these hills and fields are now our very own. Once called Crown Land, but they are now our very, very own. Mr. Speaker, I want to repeat in closing for the record that the Prime Minister and my colleagues in this honorable chamber, that each and every one of you enjoy my full support, and I look forward to delivering meaningful contributions in this honorable house. And to the good people of Bridgetown, once again, in closing and in conclusion, I thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support this amendment, and I am obliged to you. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Christchurch East.
Mr. Speaker, I am standing here, sir, in awe of what I believe to probably be one of the best maiden speeches ever given in Parliament. By someone who's obviously as modest as he is brilliant. But, sir, I do say this seriously. I sat down and listened, and I closed my eyes, and I felt like I was one of his constituents, and I felt I was putting my ex 5 times to ensure that he got there this time, that he'll get there next time, and he'll be there forever. So I just want to commend the honourable member for the city of Bridgetown on his maiden address, and to say, well, if he even almost finishes as he started, that he will go down in history as one of the great politicians in Barbados, sir. Sir, I want to take this opportunity as well to thank, as is customary, to thank the good people of Christchurch East who reposed their trust in me and gave me a second term. And I will not even be so vain as to say I will try to do as well as I did last time. I will try to do even better, sir. And I assure the residents and constituents of Christchurch East and Barbados that the best is yet to come. So I want to thank them publicly. I want to thank my campaign team. I want to thank all those who supported me. I want to thank my wife, my family, my friends, and I want to thank the team that I ran with, because no man is an island. And as good as we may have been in representing our constituents, I think it was actually the strength of this team that brought everybody home, and we must not forget that. We must look at those who are in front of us, those who are to the right, to the left, and those who are behind us, and know that they're the ones who are keeping us going in the same direction. So I want to thank all who contributed, and the Prime Minister as well for her leadership. On to the bill itself, sir. Sir, Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun. And it is particularly so in this case. It is signaled, sir, that one of the first thing that we're doing, the first item of business, is actually the constitutional amendment to correct what is effectively an anomaly. And people often question why we do things. The Prime Minister is fond of saying that there's no wrong time to do the right thing. And you, sir, as a lawyer who has done many, many criminal cases, know that the Constitution and the law is indeed a living thing. The Constitution is a living document. It cannot be static. It's meant to embody the rights, obligations of government towards its citizens, citizens towards each other as they stand at any point in time. But those rights and obligations, and even the fundamental rights, change or they evolve. If the Constitution was to stay static, then we would still be slaves. So if the Constitution was to stay static, then women still would not have the right to vote. If the Constitution was to stay static, sir, then we who are not landed gentry would not be able to vote either. So a Constitution must necessarily change as times go on. It doesn't make sense if you discover a glaring, or you see a glaring anomaly, or there's a substantive reason to change something, to hold that until a larger change is made. If it is wrong or inconvenient now, then we must address it now. As we go through the consultation on the Constitution, quite frankly, sir, we don't know the things. We don't know what the final Constitution, the new Constitution of a Republican Barbados is going to look like. That will come after consultation. There are things, sir, that as you start to speak to people are going to become apparent that we may not have considered. It is apparent, sir, that when the Constitution was framed, that the drafters did not consider properly a time such as this. It factored in their contemplation, but in terms of digging down to the nuts and the bolts and to the granular level at what the implications are, then that was not done. And quite often it's only when you are in this situation that you can fully appreciate what needs to happen. So having identified that there was an issue, an anomaly, sir, then what do we do with it? It makes no sense. I'm a man of action, sir, as are you, as is the Prime Minister. It made no sense to wait indefinitely and perpetuate what is effectively a flaw in the Constitution that we have identified and that needs to be rectified now to accommodate certain things. It makes no sense to wait until we go through the whole consultative process on the new Constitution when we've already identified that one. And quite frankly, there may be other little adjustments to the Constitution that may be made pending the redraft or the drafting of a new Constitution. Now, sir, why this is important, and this discussion about the youth. The Prime Minister and the Honourable Attorney General have already spoken in detail about the provisions to accommodate an opposition or opposition picks in the Senate. And I will just say briefly on that, sir. Everybody has their own agenda. and it is true. Those of us in here are the persons who the public of Barbados chose, who the electorate of Barbados chose to represent them in 30 little elections. We see it as one general election. We are probably the only people that see it as one general election. But quite frankly, sir, for those who are actually contesting the seats, you know that you're fighting for your future in your constituency, as the honourable member for the city of Bridgetown was fighting for his in his. And while we see it that way, sir, and while that the results of that, those 30 small battles are what is constituted here, there's another aspect to our democracy. There's a second tier, there's another level of checks and balances that is found in what we call the upper house. And by virtue of the history of the upper house, sir, the person in the upper house didn't demean themselves into the cut and thrust of elective politics. They didn't have to go and beg for votes, right? They were appointed and they retained some level, I guess, of dignity as opposed to delving into the fray. So where you have a situation, sir, where appointments have to happen, then the framework has to be put in place for the appointments to happen. If our constitution contemplates, and our laws and our parliament contemplates 21 senators broken down as 12 government, 7 independent, 2 opposition, and there is no formal opposition reflected in the lower house, then what do? Now, it cannot be that we intend to have a deficiency of 2 seats. That offsets the balance in many, many different ways, sir. And this is where what was contemplated in 1966 did not go far enough. It addressed the concept of it, but not actually the mechanics of it. And the reality, sir, in Barbados, if you ask who's the opposition in Barbados, anybody will tell you it's the Democratic Labour Party. That's who's the opposition in Barbados. Is either the B's or the D's. I don't think that in any of the 30 small elections that we had that constituted the entire general election, I think it was always the Barbados Labour Party candidate first, the Democratic Labour Party candidate second, and then the other fringe parties down the line. So in the perception of the people and in the actual vote itself, sir, the people in Barbados recognize that the opposition is actually Democratic Labour Party. If they choose to not recognize themselves as such, that's their business. But, sir, where we have a situation where we're trying to keep the office of the president from domestic politics, if the president was to appoint the extra 2 senators, sir, then the president is trying to create a check and balance in a way that was not contemplated. The president has her 7 picks already. So those 2 picks were meant to be the voice of the opposition, not even pretending to be independent. So for the president to delve down into that certain appoint those 2 people would be to actually demean the office of the president. And I think it is a good thing that we're not putting the president in that situation. So we fall once again, when all is said and done, and the Constitution, which, as I started by saying, is a living document. So we've identified this situation. It came up last election. It was corrected, for want of a better word. It was corrected or avoided because of the defection of one, right, who, I guess, sacrificed himself to the cause, if that's how he chooses to look at it. But we didn't have to deal with it then because one left from here. I don't see anybody in here, sir, who is intent on leaving and going anywhere. So we have a situation where somebody has to be put there. The Constitution it is right and proper, sir, to adjust the Constitution at this point in time in a way that is proposed to make allowance for the generally held and regarded opposition to have a voice where they were not given a voice by the people, to be given a voice by appointment in a way that was contemplated to be a check and balance. They have a role to play in the Barbadian politics. And I think, sir, this is more a case of if we do this, it forces them to get their house in order a lot faster than they contemplated that they would have to do. But if, sir, then they can't do that, then maybe they don't qualify to be the opposition of Barbados. And the Constitution then makes provision for somebody else who is willing to step into that breach to put up their hand and say, choose me. I will leave that as it is and say that I completely support that part of the constitutional amendment, sir. Now, with respect to the age for representation in both houses of parliament. An interesting thing happened this election, sir. This election was a young people election. In my constituency, sir, in a particular area, in my constituency, the young people took it over entirely and effectively told me to stay out of it. They didn't like my first campaign song, and they went by themselves, and they got another campaign song that the young people held on to and followed behind. They went and canvassed by themselves. They came back and gave me a list of people. They handled a block of my constituency by themselves, saying to me, Abrams, we got your back, now leave us alone. Now, sir, this changes the perception of what we often see. A lot of us, well, not us, I never did, a lot of people wrote off the youth as they're a lost generation. They have nothing to say. They don't deserve a voice. That is not a position I've ever held, and it's not a position I hold now. Now, if the young people deserve a voice, at what age do we give them a voice? At what age do we say that you are now old enough for us to properly recognize you? Now, I'll call the name because it's in wide circulation, Khalil Kofdewala. He's an exceptional young person. I have followed him for a while. I've heard him speak many times, not always politically. I've seen his writings in the newspaper. He is an exceptional person. The worst thing we can do is stymie people from reaching their full potential when they have something to offer. For us to deny young persons who have something to offer the chance to offer it at the highest level where they are otherwise qualified to do so, except by age, sir, is to deny them and probably to hinder us and our progress as a country. Where's the magic of the age of 21? What's the magic of it? We have a situation, an anomalous situation in Barbados, sir, where there were many different ages for many different things. There was the age of criminal responsibility. At one time was at 12 years old. Then there's that gray area between 14 and 16, the young person's defense on the charge of rape. There's the age of 16 for the age of consent, but you can consent to have sex, but you can't get married until you're 18 years old. You can get married at 18 years old, but at one point in time, you still couldn't inherit property until you're 21, right? And these ages fluctuate. You can buy alcohol. Until recently, you could have bought alcohol at 16 years old, but you can't buy cigarettes at 18. So why allow me to choose my poison as being alcohol, not cigarettes? So there are too many ages and age disparities being juggled in our legislation, and we need to bring it all in line. It is actually confusing. It's confusing for young people. I saw a young person this Christmas, and they asked me for a drink. And they said, Skipper, how old are you? And he said, 17. I said, nah, Skipper, you can't drink. You want to get me arrested? He said, Abrams, you could buy alcohol at 16. I said, no, you could have bought alcohol at 16. You no longer can buy alcohol at 16. So I might have bought you a drink a year before, but I sure as hell can't buy one now. But it is something that we need to decide firmly. What is the age at which we accept somebody as an adult? Now, I'll tell you something else, sir. I have 30 godchildren. So godchild number 30, for whatever, you don't know who she is. But the most recent one, she's a youngster, and I saw her with her sister, who is 7 years old, a couple of days ago. They came to visit me. And the 7-year-old child, I thought I was bright at 7. But sir, next to this child, I didn't know nothing. I used to read comics at 7 years old. I read what you put in my hand. But those children have the internet. Those children know who the president of the United States is. Those children probably know who the speaker in the U.S. is. So they know more about you than I knew about any politician at 7 years old. And so if we take it upon ourselves to go and try to look in the homework book of a 7-year-old child, we would get very ashamed. I will tell you, sir, there was a situation where myself, sir, and the Honourable Leader of Government Business were looking at the homework. And this is not even now, so this is like about, I don't know, a good 10 years ago. We were looking at the homework book of somebody who's 11. Sir, I would tell you, having gone through Harrison College, having gone through UWI, having 2 degrees, I couldn't even do some of the mathematics that was in the book for an 11-year-old child 10 years ago. Children are developing and young people are developing at a much faster age than we can possibly contemplate. Back to Mr. Kofdewala. This go round, sir, he reached out to me. I didn't even reach out to him. He contacted our campaign team and he offered himself as a platform speaker for me. A lot of my team didn't know him. I said, "Are y'all berserk?" Sorry, that might not be. I speak in young people language, sir, because this is a young people message. I said, "Are y'all crazy?" Of course, I would like him to speak for me. The first time he spoke for me, sir, he got there early, first of all. I think he got there before we even set up the meeting. And then he spoke for me. And by the time he was finished, sir, if I was in any doubts, I would have voted for myself. He presented in a way that put others to shame. The face of politics is changing, and it's changing because the young people don't want the same things that we believe that they want. They're not interested in politicians cursing people on a platform. They're not interested in slander or defaming people. They want to know what the issues are. What you're doing for young people. What you're doing for old people. What you're doing for students. What are you doing for COVID? These are some of the searching questions that they asked me this go round. And Mr. Kofdewala represented himself in a way, sir, that I thought to myself, I am looking forward to seeing this youngster in Parliament because I know he is destined to get there. So the fact that one of the first items of business that we're doing here is something to put him, that will allow him to qualify to represent the people, not yet in the elective state, but as an appointed senator, right, means a lot because I more than believe that he is eminently competent, not just to speak for young people in the Senate, but to speak for anybody in Barbados in the Senate. Sir, I want to say it is not just limited to him. I spoke at a meeting, sir, and after I spoke, one of my supporters called me over. She wanted me to see something that her grandson had written. So I was speaking, he was in the car listening to me, and he was writing his notes. And by the time the whole meeting was finished, the boy had penned a narrative breaking down what it was that I had said. And he's 14 years old, sir. His name, and I'm saying it because I have the permission of his mother to call it, and because it's being said in the most complimentary way. His name is Marquand Gittins Gay. Marquand gave me an analysis of my speech that gave me cold bumps, sir, at 14 years old. I didn't even know Marquand is one of the quietest children you could ever hope to meet. He is a shy boy. I did not know he had an interest. I thought he was being dragged there by his mother, right? When he gave me that, I was stunned. So I asked Marquand, do you want to speak on a platform? I fully expected this boy to say no. And he said yes. A 14-year-old boy, sir, ascended a platform and spoke on my behalf. And when he was finished, a number of people in the area that he spoke in Southern Heights, a middle-class area. A number of people in the area he spoke came out to ask who was that boy that they heard, and told me how proud they were that I actually gave young people a voice. He was not dragged, kicking and screaming. He wanted to do it. Our young people want to play their part. Our young people want to get involved. Our young people want to be a part of that change that we're bringing to politics in Barbados, sir. And I think for anybody to try to stop what is a positive wave of young people will be to do Barbados a disservice. I started by saying, sir, that there's nothing new under the sun. And if I may, sir, read from the extract from the House of Assembly debates, Tuesday the 14th of December, 1971. This was a resolution to reduce the age of legal majority from 21 years to 18 years. The speaker was Mr. Adams. The Right Excellent GM Tom Adams, sir. The Most Honourable. And it says, the Right Honourable. We all, sir, know who I'm speaking about. Mr. Speaker, I rise to move the passing of a resolution which stands in my name, whose purpose is to seek to reduce the age of legal majority in Barbados from 21 years to 18 years. Nobody knows from what strange avenue of civil or common law the age of 21 years was fixed as the age of majority, the age at which a child will become a man or a woman, as the case may be. Sufficient to say that Barbados has inherited this as most countries have inherited it, and it has become part of our law, unchangeable except by legislation. For some time, persons all over the world have argued that in these days, as educational facilities are increased, as international communications and intranational communications are expanded, so that the experience available to a youth or a girl of 15 or 16 years may be greater than the experience available to a woman of 60 or 100 years. In Barbados, you may vote at the age of 18. If a Barbadian goes abroad and becomes a resident of Great Britain or the United States, there are even circumstances in which they may become liable for military service. You're old enough to vote, you're old enough to work and to fight, but no provision is made for you to become an adult. And if you have the wisdom, I respectfully suggest to honourable members to exercise your franchise to put members into the House of Assembly at 18. You can have the wisdom to own property, to get married, and to carry out other functions as an adult. I do not want to be long over this resolution because I sincerely hope there are no honourable members who are so insensitive to the aspirations of youth that they will not give their support in this regard. Sir, I can't say anything more than that. The age of 21 was an arbitrary age. It may have been applicable at the time that it was put there. When 21 was written into our Constitution, sir, at the time, the age of majority, I believe, was actually 21. The age of majority was changed in that time to 18, but 21 still remained a benchmark for ultimate adulthood. Times have changed significantly since then. Times have changed significantly since Mr. Adams suggested that age of 18 should be the age to represent in the House of Parliament. We are now at that point in time now, sir. We are now at that crossroad. We are now at the point where we can do some good, or we can forever spin top in mud. So I, sir, firmly believe that if I can vote at 18, if I can pick you at 18, then you could pick me at 18 too, and all other things that go with it. So, sir, having said all of that, and not wishing to be much longer, I wish to entirely support the constitutional amendment suggested that would make provisions for the appointment of the 2 senators for the opposition in the Senate, and also to formalize the age of majority and the age of representation and the age for all other things, sir, at 18 years of age. I thank you.
Honourable Member for St. John.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the House until 2:30.
Seconder, please.
Please second.
The question is that this honourable chamber be suspended until 2:30 p.m. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. This honourable chamber stands suspended until 2:30 p.m.